gladly we have an expert here with us in the studio who is also the academic lead of the Transcultural Leadership Summit. It's Professor Josef Wieland. Professor Wieland holds the chair of Institutional Economics, Organizational Governance, Integrity Management and Transcultural Leadership. For more than 20 years, he has been an expert in the fields of business compliance and business ethics, and he has advised political as well as business institutions. In his academic career, he developed the theories of relational economics and governance ethics. Here at Zeppelin University, Professor Wieland holds is the director of the Leadership Excellence Institute and the vice president for research. In 2017, he founded the Transcultural Caravan, that is a hub for global thinking, dedicated to tackle questions about transculturality and leadership, of course. And of course, the Transcultural Leadership Summit is part of this project as well. So, in a second, Professor Wieland will introduce us to the concept of transculturality. And again, you as audience may use the chat or put yourself on the speaker list to ask your questions to Professor Wieland directly. But before you start, Professor Wieland, I wanted to ask you what your impression on the summit is so far. And I will also hand you this so you can click on your slides later.
Yeah, I find that it's a really wonderful experience to have a discussion, an intensive discussion on this distance and using new tools and new instruments. And I found it very convincing to learn from people from all over the world on a topic which is clearly of utmost importance. That's the second one, which I really realized that the topic we choose is really important, and even more important given the global political situation we face at the moment. So Europe must learn to look for alternatives, and from my perspective, this is just the information event to think about this. And I would like to make a compliment to both of you. I think this is a very hard job, and I know you are the anchor persons. You have to organize all this, and you have to be there. You have to be present, and so on. And it's very hard work. I'm glad to share this in a very specific and beautiful way. I would like to say thank you. That's really great.
Thank you.
It's also a nice experience I had. Yeah. Transculturality, what I have to say, what I will try to say is that comes close to what you presented in the last presentation from the last group. What are the cultural environment of such a project? And is it really realistic to think about of such a new cooperation corridor? Only the other day, one of my colleagues, a very famous colleague here in Germany, called the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative a neo-imperialistic project, aiming at creating a system of political and economical influence under the banner of free trade and multilateralism. I'm not sure whether all people in Germany think in this way, but I guess this is more or less an opinion where some people believe that could be realistic. But even let us assume, just for a moment, what I don't believe, that this assessment is one we could discuss about. My question is, what are the consequences we can draw from this assumption? Are we in a position, Europe, to ignore this project if we cannot stop it? Or wouldn't it be much smarter to have a closer look at the opportunities and risks involved and try to formulate a European concept how to react to this invitation? Because I believe there must be a reaction of the European level, and what we at the moment see is that some European states or countries react to this, but not the European Union. There's not much activity in the European Union to come to grips with this job. And I believe that is something we should change. And I also believe that we can change this, and that this is part of this effort. So what are the European interests and political goals we want to achieve? So that's for me the important question. My question is not about the motivation of the Chinese government. I do not know, I will never know, and that's all speculation. What we have to do is to think about our own interests. What do we want to reach by achieving this? And we still have no answer, and that is our weak point. There are many unsolved questions like this around the Silk Road Initiative, and I would like just to concentrate on one aspect. What are the cultural conditions and challenges involved from a European perspective? Because the Silk Road is such a cultural concept in itself. So it's not just about the Belt and Road Initiative we should be interested in. The Silk Roads have a history of more than 2,000 years. And it is a common cultural heritage of Asia and Europe. It's nothing invented by the Chinese Communist Party as part of the civilization in a big part of the world. And there's a common cultural heritage of Asia and Europe we should find out. And at the beginning, it was a network of trade routes, many trade routes, and all these trade routes had no specific names. The term Silk Road came in the late 19th century, and it was the German term Seidenstraßen, who were then translated into English, and it was a geographical term coined by Ferdinand von Richthofen. And what he would like to express is that these Silk Roads were bridging China and Europe via Central Asia. That is where we have the term from. Before, so the 2,000 years before, there was a lively interaction and cooperation on the Silk Roads, and there were goods exchange, knowledge, cultural norms, and district aspects were always intertwined. So there's no way to foster the idea that we could exchange goods and maybe business knowledge, but we will not exchange literature and cultural norms too. That is always the case. And with a certain dynamic equilibrium of these three factors, no network of exchange and cooperation can exist. So I don't believe that there will be just an economic network, investment, exchange, if it is not connected with a cultural discussion about what are the guiding norms we want to follow to do this business in a proper and, as economists I would say, in a transaction cost effective way. But there's also a deeper level of the Silk Road, because the Silk Road is also a story of moving. Human beings were most of the time nomads, and moving is something we are good in. And the Silk Roads were some sort of a dream to move in space and time, exploring, doing entrepreneurship, and cooperate with other human beings and multiple cultures. And I believe that this is in the DNA of the term Silk Roads, and we should not forget about this, because this will motivate people to accept risk. Because this project, even the Belt and Ring Road Initiative, comes with risk, with tremendous risk, and without this spirit, we will not be in a position to master this. And what I've appreciated is that the National Development and Reform Commission issued in March 2015 an action and vision plan on jointly building Silk Road Belt and the 20th century maritime Silk Road. And I would like to go through this together with you just to give you the information and then maybe to comment on this. The center of this document is the so-called Silk Road spirit. And the Silk Road spirit defines, so to say, a symbolic level of aspirations. And if you do an analysis, as I did, you'll find some terms very often. For example, communication and cooperation between the East and the West. That there's a cultural heritage shared by all human civilization, symbolized in these trade routes. That there are a lot of commonalities or a community of shared interests, so that is based on interest, not just on goodwill. And President Xi Jinping called it a community of common destiny. That sounds very dramatic, but I believe we have to accept this perspective, that here is an offer to start a discussion about a way we can go together or not. So this spirit comes together with principles and values in this document, and this principle and values should be or are aiming at creating a base of cooperation in this place. And then the principles are peace and cooperation, openness and inclusiveness. So I quote here from the Chinese document. It's not something I made up. Mutual learning and mutual benefits, harmony and inter-civilization tolerance, following market rules and international norms. I think from a perspective of the political science, these are principles for peaceful coexistence. Not to intervene in the realm of the other people. But I don't believe that we can build up a new Silk Road movement just of the principles for peaceful coexistence. It's a good starting point, and I believe we can discuss about this. And these principles aim at a win-win situation. My colleague from Beijing, from Beida, explained it. It's a win-win situation through cooperation. But you have to keep in mind that a win-win situation not necessarily means that everybody gains the same. In our culture, maybe people believe a win-win situation is everybody, that there's an equal advantage. But it could also mean that one party gains more than the other, but both gain. Something we could keep in mind. There's a term of cultural inclusiveness, to cooperate and by talking to each other and not starting with differences. And this should lead to a common development. Also, the term harmony in our culture means something very nice. Peacefulness, friendliness, and all this. But I have learned in my time in China that harmony could also mean conflict. And that you have to know your place in hierarchy. So this is what I understood, I'm not an expert, a sort of a yin-yang. It means this and that at the same time. Not just, but we tend to look for a clear definition what it means. Win-win means both win the same. Harmony means there's no conflict. And that is the first thing we should start with, learning that, for example, values, which we find also there, pluralism, openness, dialogue, understanding, tolerance, respect, diversity, and self-interest, could have different meanings in different cultures, and as all values, they only give you an advice how to behave in a certain situation, a context. Value create meaning only in the context. Only context, only transaction, values are very, very open. That is the reason why we can agree on the United Nations level on all types of values, because they depend on the context. And I believe also that we should have a discussion about the meaning here, because this is maybe one way not to only to understand each other, but also to create new commonalities. Let's try to draw some conclusions from this document with regard to strategy. I guess that the Belt Road Initiative is a new concept of globalization. And this has a geopolitical aspect. Maybe China sees themselves as a global governor, setting standards or influencing the standards, the rules of the game. But I don't believe that this means that the Chinese government will export the Chinese model to the world. And I do also not believe that they intend to adapt to the Western world. It's just to create a new network of activity and give them a base. It is also a geo-economic project, and this story is about new global and common markets. Building the infrastructure financially, technically, but also in a moral sense. And therefore it is a transcultural project, because the column number 5 in this action plan is about culture. It's not just about financing and so on. And these cultural commonalities might structure the discourse and the perception. Behind this, what I see is the assumption that we live in a phase of transition, that we live in a sort of an interregnum from an old to a new order, and that the best way is to have a policy supporting compatibility and connectivity. And connectivity is an important phrase in the Chinese foreign policy. Connectivity means something that Belt and Ring Road Initiative might be a sort of a mandala of distinct and integrated cultures. So I think this does not mean necessarily that you have to try to achieve global dominance. It could also mean that you are looking for a way to connect diversity, and the unintended or intended result might be that there's emergence of commonalities based on shared interests. Business firms have to deal with this. One of the biggest part if you want to invest in this region, and this region is, by the way, not just China. It is Central Asia, it is Eurasia, and it is Europe. Most of us focus on China, as I did, but one question left will be, what is with the rest in between? I don't believe that the Russians, with their new Eurasian continental land bridge, will join simply this movement. But this is something. Their cultural risk, coming from different religious heritage, Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, Muslims, animism, atheism, all types of religions we find there. We have different moral reference points. The family. Everything what helps the family is good. Clans, religions, nations, individuals, or even universalistic values too. So the meaning of a value is governed by these connotations. There are different concepts of identity and belonging. In the Western world, we tend to say, I identify myself with. And in other parts of the world, people would say, I belong to something others. And that makes a big difference. So there are frames and perception of values and different political cultures, which has to be addressed and managed. So then what is transcultural management? I do not want to go too deep into this because tomorrow we will have more opportunities. But in a nutshell, the idea is, by accepting diversity as a natural starting point of all cultural discourse, we aim at creating commonalities. This is a learning process. And how can we react from this perspective, creating commonalities as a learning process, do this in a management, in a managerial way? The first is we have to learn that cultural diversity is a new normal. I do not want to say that we have to unlearn universalism, but we're all educated, at least my generation, that our perception is the West, the transatlantic bridge. And this is a good thing. Everything in the West is good. And now we have to learn a perspective, the East. And we have to give up the idea that everything in the East is bad because everything in the West is good. But a lot of the discussions we have at the moment circle around this, and I believe that the Chinese idea with spirit and values and principles is to create a new narrative, a new language, to communicate a new China, because all these values we know. These are values known in the whole world, and what they try to do is to undock their Chinese characteristics to this. So that is the discussion, is a challenge for us, and it's not clear in advance that we will be the champions of all these values because they sound familiar to us. But what I believe from a transcultural management perspective, that we at the moment have a discussion, what do they really mean in this context of the Silk Road. So then cultural diversity will be the standard. And that means we are very often on our way to learn. Then transcultural competence is a general purpose competence. The general purpose competence means, from an intercultural management perspective, there's a pairwise comparison of nations with its specificities and so on. But given the fact that there are so many countries and nations involved, more than 70 and even more, it doesn't make sense to invest in the pairwise comparison. Then you maybe have a specific purpose competence, but we need to have a competence to deal with cultural difference and create commonalities. This is something very interesting because it is a network thing. So based on this idea, we should look for a robust reduction of complexity and not talk about the culture of nations and something like this. It's much better to talk about what are the specific transactions at hand and what are our shared interests and what type of norms do we need to do this. because then we can start a process of learning. So then cultural preferences are a common learning process, trial and error. And we have to organize practice, cumulative practice, to gain common experience. Norms do not come from the seminars in universities. Norms come out of practical life of human being. And there is a nice quotation from the Western philosopher Whitehead. It says, beside experience, there's nothing, 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 bare nothingness. And I would really agree to this. This experience, and that's my last, this experience could be part of interaction on the nation state, of the government's state. That is where at the moment the cultural interaction takes place. Chinese invest a lot of money in new cultural institutions along the road. And maybe the Germans will invest in the Goethe Institute too. But I think the discussion between the Confucian and the Goethe Institute will lead to something but not solve our problems. So what I would agree, or what I would recommend is that we have different levels where we can have these discussions on the level of organizations, corporations, when they invest, corporate cultures, university, when they take part in this movement, but also on the level of professionals, bodies of all kinds, professors and so on, and even on the level of individuum we can do something, because I believe that sounds very simple, but given the high stakes in this process, there's a lot of work we have to do to get it just started, not to mention to finish it to some level of a common understanding what we are going to do. I would like to express my own opinion in this case. I believe for Europe, for the West, this is an important issue. It's something which will make a difference, or could make a difference about our future. I think we should start to evaluate these options, do it carefully, and we have to find out that we know what we want to gain from this, and not permanently speculate what the Chinese might gain from this. And I hope I could convince you a little bit that values, principles, culture in general play an important role, and that cultural diversity turned into commonalities by transcultural management is something we should learn very soon. Thank you.